There you go. Can we start again? Good morning and welcome to the Institute for Security Studies and this morning's seminar on corruption within the criminal justice system and how that facilitates the commission of specifically cash in transit robberies, but I'm certain also a number of other serious crimes. My name is Johan Burger. I am a research consultant with the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies. And I'll be chairing this morning's session. Also, just to let you know that the presentation part of the seminar will be live streamed on our website, the ISS website, so the cat and mouse rules will not apply during the presentations. But it will apply during question and answer, the question and answer session. Just briefly a background to how we arrived at this seminar. Some of you may have read my ISS Today article that was published on the ISS website on the 19th of June this year. You are welcome if you haven't. Read that article to go and read it. It gives you some background. Now, I will introduce the panel shortly, but just some background. According to statistics from the South African Banking Risk Information Centre, of which Mr. Kevin Twyname is a representative, South Africa experienced huge increases in cash in transit robberies between 2014 and 2017. In fact, 110% increase, but he will probably give us a lot more information in this regard. Now, I think for us the problem is that apart from the monetary losses during these cash robberies, the fact that these criminals are heavily armed with submachine guns, such as AK-47s, R5 rifles, and the fact that they are absolutely prepared to kill anyone who comes in their way, who resists them. They have also demonstrated an absolute willingness to engage even the police in armed battles, gun battles. But I think what is really surprising about these cash in transit robbers is the audacity with which they carry out these heists, using mostly industrial explosives, but carrying out some of these robberies in broad daylight and in close proximity of the public. We've seen many video footage of how they carry out these attacks, apparently oblivious of the presence of members of the public. But what is even more surprising is the reaction of members of the public who, with complete disregard to their own safety, largely remain on scene and take video footage of these attacks as it happens, even the explosions, and then share that. But fortunately, we are able then to see those images during the evening news bulletin, so it places us all at the scene and makes us all witnesses to what is happening out there in terms of these violent crimes. But I think what we want to do today is to discuss in more detail how these criminals operate and specifically how they exploit weaknesses within the criminal justice system, especially the corruption that we know exists within the police, but also more broadly in the criminal justice system with prosecutors and even magistrates. And we know the involvement of lawyers, some of them on the full-time employ of these criminals. And we want to look a little more closely to how this facilitates the commission of these crimes. So today on our panel we have three speakers. First of all, we will have Brigadier Ibrahim Katwa, who's the Section Head Operations, Serious and Organized Crime from the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, or the Hawks. As I also know now, Brigadier Katwa is standing in for General Labia, who at the last moment was called by the Minister to attend to another urgent matter, and he's apologized, but he's sent a very capable representative. We know Brigadier Katwa, and he's got his whole team assembled around him, all present here today. So I am very grateful to Brigadier Katwa that you are able to stand in for General Labia. Hopefully we'll have another occasion soon where we can have General Labia as a speaker. Our second speaker will be Dr. Mahlogonolo Tubani, who's a senior lecturer in the Department of Criminology and Security Science, the College of Law at UNISA. Dr. Tubani did a master's degree on the subject of cash in transit robberies. So welcome to you too, Dr. Tubani. And our third speaker is also a person I think most of you will know, Mr. Kevin Twynham, who is the head service delivery at the South African Banking Risk Information Center, SABRIC. And Kevin specializes in violent banking and cash in transit related crimes. He's often also interviewed in the media, so I think he'll be well known. And Kevin, thank you very much also for your presence today. So before I then call our first speaker to the podium, ladies and gentlemen, let me just thank the Hans Seidel Foundation, who are supporting this event today, and then also we are grateful for the support of the other members of the ISS Partnership Forum. That is the European Union and the governments of Australia, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the USA. All right, I would now like to invite Brigadier Katwa to come and do his presentation. Thank you very much. Just before I do that, just bear with me a moment. Can I just have the first slide of my presentation, the second slide, sorry. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, just before Brigadier Katwa starts his presentation, I just thought that this is helpful to share this slide with you. This was published on Legal Brief on the 3rd of July, and it struck me when I read this article that it is precisely in line with this seminar, where a magistrate, a prosecutor, and a police officer, an attorney, were convicted of fraud and corruption. And they were arrested during a sting operation by the Hawks. And the court found that all three of them conspired to accept bribes to influence the outcome of criminal cases. They accepted money to strike a criminal case from the roll or ensure a lighter sentence in a trap set by the Hawks. Now, I think this is the case with many of not just cash in transit robberies, but certainly with cash in transit robberies makes it easier for them to carry out these attacks. And from the research, and I'm certain my colleague over there, Dr. Dubani, will refer to this, they are saying that without access to corrupt officials, they will not be able to carry out these attacks. So now you are welcome to the podium. Thank you, Brig.
Thank you, Program Director Dr. Johan Burger. Respected ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First and foremost, may I take this opportunity to express our sincere appreciation to the Institute for Security Studies for taking this good initiative of talking about something very topical and out in the public domain, and also for having the DPCI, or the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, to be able to present here. I'm sure many of you are wondering what we have to say, and I can assure you that we will be able to meet, hopefully, your great expectations. In my presentation, basically, for the benefit of those that are not familiar with cash-in-transit robberies, we will basically highlight how cash-in-transit robbery networks operate, and then we will specifically zoom into the corruption and complicity as a business model, not only for cash-in-transit robberies, but also for transnational organized crime. This is very much a very important way in which organized crime is able to flourish. And then to be able to really share with you some of our spectacular operational delights in terms of dealing with both complicit security officers as well as our colleagues. And then most importantly, what we are doing to turn around this situation that is really impacting on ourselves. Now, the issue of cash-in-transit robberies is not a new phenomenon. It has been around for about 20 years, and we have had high tides and low tides. And 2018 has started with a loud bang, and certainly we have been hit in the first semester in particular. And I think what has amplified the situation is the AV, or the armored vehicle attacks. And it is for the first time, and I think my colleague from Sabrik will talk about, where the armored vehicle attacks were able to surpass the more opportunistic cross-pavement robberies, what we call the cross-pavement robberies, which is very much a very quick grab and move on kind of scenario. Now, what is important is, as Dr. Berger indicated, is where the ordinary public were able to go viral on social media, because these things were not happening like in the past, where they would have looked at a strategic location in the middle of nowhere. It was basically even described by some as terror on wheels, because the cash-in-transit vehicles were now attacked in an urban space, and the utilization of explosives and outsourcing of explosive expertise to be able to ensure that you can have an improvised blast so you can get maximum money was what was basically being looked into. Now, it is unfortunate that police officers, law enforcement officials, and as the doctor has indicated, even in the broader criminal justice, that are complicit or colluding with transnational organized crime. But what is important is, from a Hawks perspective, both corruption, not only for cash-in transits, but basically dealing with criminal justice corruption and the more organized public sector corruption is one of our national priority offenses. And cash-in-transit robberies since the 11th of August 2017, with the situation growing, we have basically been responsive and we have declared it a national priority offense. And the National Bureau for Illegal Firearms Control and Priority Violent Crime, of which I am currently overseeing, is basically at the forefront, and we are officially mandated to investigate cash-in-transit robberies impacting the country. And I think working collaboratively, we have been able to show how we've been able to basically stabilize cash-in-transit robberies in dealing with this thing. Now, when we're looking at organized crime and more specifically aggravated robberies, cash-in-transit robberies and I think truck hijackings are basically done in an organized fashion. In an organized fashion because the masterminds behind this are basically able to identify the opportunities. Now, although the word military precision is being used, I would like to perhaps give a word of caution. It is just a way of speak. There is no way that the military is behind this. So I just want to immediately clarify that. But what we are basically dealing with, and this is not very unique to cash-in-transit, we are finding that contemporary transnational organized crime is more network-based. And what you will find is that there are these very dynamic and flexible networks that are able to operate by being able to mobilize the resources that they would need to be able to commit the cash-in-transit robberies. Now, with cash-in-transit robberies, you are not going to find a distinct value chain from level 1 right up to the top. What you are basically going to find is this kingpin who identifies the opportunities, he will be the central actor from the time that this opportunity is identified right until it is executed. And as we know with cash in transit robberies, if it is very much the opportunistic cross pavement, is 3 or 4 guys, and if we are dealing with these armored vehicle attacks, then groups bigger than a rugby team is normally the norm in what we're dealing with. Now, I think it's not the issue of corruption as this team is going about. It's actually the actual participation in cash in transit robberies involving law enforcement officials and members of the security industry. Corruption perhaps distorts the message in terms of the involvement of law enforcement personnel, because you will see from the case studies that we are going to illustrate to you that these people have been part and parcel of the actual cash in transit robbery and would have played quite a active role. Now, in committing a cash in transit robbery, it is a multi-dimensional organized crime activity, and logistics is key to how you are going to commit this. And that is why I said the way this logistics infrastructure has to be organized to make sure that everything is basically in place to be able to commit the cash in transit robbery. That means you need the firearms, and as we said with the AV attacks, you need the explosives. You need the specialists who are the blasters who are going to do the job, and you know these are scarce resources that has to be shared amongst the cash in transit robbery networks. Then they have to basically organize high performance luxury vehicles, either 4x4s, so that they can be able to, and again, you are going to have expertise in that in terms of how you be able to ram the vehicle and how you are able to then get away very quickly from the scene. And then what is important with cash in transit robberies from the extensive experience, and I think there are certainly eminent people here who can confirm what I'm saying, is that you are not going to find the same group that is repeatedly involved. They basically will form and dissolve according to the opportunities that are required. And as you know, the issue of fatalities can be quite big in terms of facing law enforcement in such things, because it's firepower matching firepower in dealing with this situation. Now, in terms of cash in transit robberies, both security officers, bank employees, as well as law enforcement officers, they provide a service. And this is not, again, something specific. Although our team is cash in transit, we find this in truck hijackings, that the law enforcement officers will provide firearms. We also know that firearms of the defense force is utilized. In these scenes, you are going to find bulletproof vests that are coming in from the police, R4s, R1s. All of these things I don't think are a secret. We have to basically acknowledge this and basically clean what ourselves are dealing with. But they provide that. And then most importantly is the insider information that the bank employees or the security officers are going to provide. Depends what you are doing. If you are going to be doing a cash depot, they need to provide the layout of the cash depot in terms of how things operate, who is in this. If you're dealing with a van, they will need the schedules. And then basically you can be able to improvise the job that you have in mind. Now, in dealing with the cash in transit robberies, as we indicated, this is a business model. And this business model is very important for the survival and furtherance of the activity. So in transnational organized crime, corruption is not an isolated or transactional activity. For contemporary transnational organized crime to be able to flourish, they need to make very, very targeted recruitment and identifying of people in law enforcement and whatever industry they are going to attack, to be able to recruit people from there who can then provide them the intelligence, provide them the insider knowledge for them to be able to operate. And really, I think we have seen the issue of corruption provides the point of least resistance, because if there's corruption, it doesn't matter in what thing that organized crime is going to be targeting is basically going to allow these people to operate with a sense of basically we are on top of the situation. We can operate in terms of in many ways with the impunity. So this is something that is very important, that whether we're dealing with cash in transit robberies, whether we're dealing with truck hijackings, or we're dealing with organized crime in general, it is a business model, and we see how they invest in making sure that they can have those people in dealing with it. Then in terms of our experience over the years dealing with cash in transit robberies, again, what is very obvious is the collusion of the security officers and the bank employees in terms of how they provide the information. In many cases that we are going to talk about, there are also instances of handovers, and it is best then basically just reported. Even with truck hijackings, in many cases, these things are just handovers. They were never really a truck hijacking. So these are the realities that makes it even more complicated for both the industry as well as for law enforcement to deal with the situation. But I think with very meticulous interviewing, with very good investigations we are doing, and also the close working between ourselves and the cash in transit industry, and as well as working with SABRIC, by understanding how the industry operates, it provides us very good knowledge and expertise in how to be able to detect and solve such cases. Now, on Freedom Day of 2014, the SBV cash depot was robbed, and you can see they basically taken a European lottery of 104 million rands here, and 21 suspects were involved. So you can see there was a rugby team plus enough reserves to face Australia tomorrow there, you know. So anyway, in this case, again, you can see the presence of police officers. We had 2 serving police members as well as 4 reservists that were involved in this particular case. But a very meticulous investigation was done. And what is important also for the public to understand is these things just don't happen overnight. An average cash in transit robbery from the time of the arrest or the incident until we can sentence people, a normal life cycle of about 3 to 5 years in dealing with a situation like this. And what was special about this case is we eventually sentenced on February this year 13 accused, 479 years of imprisonment, and more importantly is about dealing with the motive of organized crime and to be able to deal with the profits and to deal with the money. And you can see here in this specific case, we work very closely with the asset forfeiture unit, and we have taken several million rands worth of assets from the cash in transit robbers and their associates. The second case study is basically, again, information being followed up, working together with Hawks and Tracker initially, and that led us to a hideout where the cash in transit robbers had out in Kriel. There was a huge shootout there. And during that incident, we did further investigations, and again, working with the Special Task Force, 8 suspects were arrested. Again, sadly, 1 SAPS member, 1 ex-SAPS member involved. You can see the firepower that these guys had at their disposal. It was, for me, it was basically their logistics base from which they would have basically put up their operations. And we had all kinds of complications in the case, but what we can assure you is the case is on track, because even though they would be trying to run away from ourselves, we have very good ways of basically apprehending these people. Then talking about collusion in the cash in transit industry, again, there's 31st October last year, initially we would have responded to a report of a cash in transit armored vehicle, and you know this is something that we have to respond with huge seriousness. But through good interviewing and understanding from our side how the industry work and being well supported by the industry, we found that this was just basically a handover, and 3 of the employees were arrested. So the matter is before court. Now, intelligence is key to dealing with cash in transit robberies, and I can tell you that in the first 6 months of this year, working collaboratively, leveraging all our operational capabilities and really being supported by our crime intelligence division, we've been able to do something spectacular to stabilize the situation as we see it, and really well supported by our minister and the top leadership of both the Hawks, the police, and every other law enforcement entity. But I just want to talk again about a case that we did in 2014. Again, information received, working jointly between the Hawks and the Special Task Force. We were able to foil this robbery in the Free State. And this was a crime scene of over 70 kilometers in terms of firepower and exchange. But I think in terms of focus and professionalism, I think we basically had the better of the day. And the four guys or four of the CIT robbers were killed there. Again, you can see it takes 4 years before we had these guys sentenced. But the fruits were certainly premium grade. You can see we got 4 life sentences on each of the 12 accused that were eventually sentenced, plus a further 87 years. So, but what I'm trying to illustrate, the bigger the cash in transit robberies, between 3 and 5 years, that is the norm in which things will move in the criminal justice system. So these things are not simplistic things that you're just going to get results overnight. It requires ourselves, after the case, to really sustain the criminal investigation, all the other things to be able to ensure that we can be able to deal with the situation. Now, as I've indicated, I am overseeing the National Bureau for Illegal Firearms Control and Priority Violent Crime. If you've got Alzheimer's, it'll be very difficult for you to repeat it. But anyway, what I really want to say is this bureau is a specialist investigative capacity that was embedded within the Hawks, and specifically to deal with the proliferation of firearms and to respond to priority violent crime. And as I've indicated, that we are responsive. Cash in transit robberies, due to the organized fashion, we have declared it as a national priority offense, and we are doing what we have to do best. And as I said, we are well supported by the cash in transit industry. We are well supported by SABRIC, and today there is a very, very healthy and collaborative relationship that allows us to deal with the situation. We had a very good stabilization operation, codenamed Ganolymp, and this has really been at the heart of this stabilization, and we had a reduction already of 63% in that first semester. It shows you the benefits of working together. Now, what is important is, if we have to deal with this, it is not only about arresting people. The processes are certainly needing more a prevention, more an awareness kind of way. And as yourselves know, that there has been processes that have been simmering to be able to ensure that in various key capabilities that we can strengthen integrity, because we need integrity beyond reproach. When the Hawks was created, this was the first legislation that prescribed that integrity beyond reproach was non-negotiable. So all of us are subjected in the Hawks in terms of vetting, in terms of very intense lifestyle audits. And this is not only for senior officers, it's every employee in the Hawks. And this model is now being basically, I'd rather say, as a best practice is being shared. And as you know, even senior officers in the police are also subjected now to all of these issues. And as we know, it's not a secret, the guys who are involved, the one thing they cannot basically suppress is their lifestyle. Somehow they will have to wear those flashy clothes, they'll have to basically show their designer watches, and if they don't do it, then their girlfriends and some of their associates will do it. And by working on lifestyle, we are finding that this is the first way to get the signs of if there is validity in the suspicions of some of our frontline officers. And as I indicated, it is not confined to cash in transit robberies. It is basically looking at corruption in total and how do we basically get this clean up. Now, in terms of the security industry, that is also important, because I think at the end of the day, when they get the loot, they have to share it. And at the end of the day, that money is not going to be buried and forgotten about, because you don't know whether that is going to be something you're going to go and dig up 10 years later. You need to spend it. And I think, again, focusing on the lifestyle is basically helping ourselves. And one of the important things, I think, as we've been dealing with this situation is there is basically no regulatory framework for the cash in transit industry. There is no minimum standards, and this has been seen as one of the shortcomings and something that is being addressed both by the SAPs trying to deal with this, as well as basically working with the industry to ensure that we get a regulatory framework moving forward so that you can be able to deal with these situations. I think that basically really brings the presentation to a conclusion. I think the issue of corruption as a business model, as I said, it is something that is a reality. It's not unique to South Africa. It's not an African thing. It is basically how organized crime basically flourishes around the world, and that is how they can operate with impunity. And I think I will end with this saying from Joe Biden, the former Vice President of the United States: fighting corruption is not just good governance. It's a self-defense. It's patriotism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Katwa. May I please call on Dr. Tabani to do a presentation? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Thank you, Brigadier, for that illuminating presentation. I'm so happy you started first. Because you laid foundation to what I'm going to say. So thank you, Dr. Berger, for the invitation, for the opportunity for me to come and present on my research, my master's research. And thank you also to the ISS, the management of ISS, for trusting me basically to stand here in front. My presentation will be based on my master's degree, which I completed in 2014. So what I'll be doing, like I said, the Brigadier laid foundation, and what I will be doing to that foundation, I'll be building on it by sharing information from the horse's mouth. So basically, I went into the prisons and I spoke to some cash and transit robbers, not only cash and transit robbers, but I'll explain who else I spoke to. So my presentation is basically based on like real stories of what I was told by the offenders. Just to start off, I work for UNISA, but I used to be employed by the banking industry. I worked for one of the big fours. And while I was employed by the banking industry, I noticed that there was a gap in research where bank-related crimes were concerned. So the prominent research at the time that I was able to find was a research conducted by Mr. Kevin's to name, I always struggle to pronounce your surname. So it was Kevin's colleague, Dr. Alice Maria. Some of you might be familiar with her. She conducted research, and it was titled "The Modus Operandi van a Bank Rover." So then, but as a researcher at the time, there was something that I wanted, something deeper that I was interested in, and I was interested in the criminal career of a bank robber or of a cash and transit robber. Then I realized there was a gap, and I decided that I'm going to fill that gap. So while it's important to know how the offense is committed, it is equally important to know why the offense is committed and what motivates the offender. And this can be established through conducting criminal career research. So that's basically what I did. I didn't only focus on the modus operandi, but I wanted to follow the criminal career of cash and transit robbers, or of basically robbery aggravated circumstances offenders. So then the title of my dissertation is The Criminal Career of Armed Robbers, with specific reference to cash and transit robberies. And I'll explain why I say with specific reference. So what criminal career does is that we study the onset, basically the beginning of a person's career as a criminal, and onset studies why and when a person starts committing crime. Then the next thing we do, we look at persistence, which is what motivates one to continue committing crime. The third thing is escalation, which basically answers the question as to, does offending escalate or become more serious, or does one specialize in a certain crime type? So I know with cash in transit robberies, I'm not going to go too much into the criminal career. I'm just giving you an introduction of what my thesis, my dissertation is about. It's available online, by the way, so you can just search the title and you will find it. So with cash in transit robberies, because I often get asked that do these people specialize in cash in transit robbery? And I think my colleagues can also agree with me that we say they do not specialize in cash in transit robbery, but they specialize in a certain skill. So if a person has a skill, for example, in handling guns or in explosives, for example, they can actually be used by ATM bombers, and they can also be used recently by people who commit cash and transit robberies. So that's what you do with the criminal career research, and that's what I found where cash and transit robberies are concerned. And the last thing that we did, or what I did with my research, is to study desistance. So then the question is, does one stop committing crime? And if a person does commit crime, why do they commit crime? In the case of cash and transit robbery, I found that there is no desistance. The offenders admitted that we do not stop committing crime. We might be incarcerated, but incarceration, it's only just an interruption to our career. But the moment we go out, we continue with cash and transit robberies. Or if cash and transit robberies have become too risky, then we move towards another crime type. So that's basically just a summary of what my dissertation was looking at. So what I did in my study is that I interviewed 40 offenders, and but not all offenders were cash in transit robbers, but most of them, which is 32, were cash in transit robbers. 8 were a mixture of bank robberies, ATM bombings, and bank burglars. So I'm also glad that the brigadier mentioned that the issue of corruption is not only in the where cash in transit robberies are concerned, because when I interviewed all these offenders, all of them did speak on the issue of corruption and how they'll collaborate with either the police officers or bank employees, cash in transit cash in transit company employees, etc. So I did my interview in 6 correctional centers in Gauteng. I visited Hoshimampuru, Zonnewater, Baviaanspoort, Johannesburg, Leeuwkop, Krugersdorp. And then my interviews lasted about 2 hours, and my schedule was divided into 2 parts. The quantitative part obviously looks more at numbers, and then the qualitative part is where I was basically getting into detail with their career. And this is what the part of that quantitative part is what is qualitative, is what is presented here today. And the study was completed in 2014, so just bear in mind. But I also explained that, as much as crime trends and patterns change, what I've seen is that the main modus operandi remains. The crimes and the patterns may change with the time, but you will see from this study that exactly what the brigadier was presenting is also highlighted in my study. So studies on armed robberies indicate that networking is a vital element of the crime of this crime type. So because most armed robberies are committed in groups and in a syndicated manner, there are certain highly respected and trusted individuals who are part of the string or network ensuring the success of robberies. This is confirming what the brigadier just presented now. So when I started my interviews, I asked them a couple of questions, and then the question that will be answered here today, I asked them that besides your group or the people that you were working with, who else assisted you, besides your co-offenders, who else assisted you in committing the robberies? And I will highlight a couple of answers, and most of these answers are verbatim. They word for word answers of what the robbers told me. So one of them says, snipers are heavily armed security guards who are supposed to guard the CIT crew. So if he is working with us, when we come, he will easily surrender. The driver of the vehicle might also be involved by giving us information on how much money is in the van, and also choose a safe and suitable spot for him to be hit. Their job is to make the job to be easier and quicker. And then another one says, you will have a guy driving a cash van saying, come and rob me, and I will not pull my gun. When you come, just secure my partner, and I will cooperate. Or a guy who works in a base of a CIT company saying, such and such a van carries such an amount of money. So what I found that was important is that the offenders make a lot of effort to develop relationships and get close with bank and cash and transit company employees. They also mentioned that the ladies, they get very, very close with the ladies in order to use them for information gathering. So the success of their robberies is somewhat dependent on the relationships they build with the cash and transit crew. So even though having inside information makes committing the crime easier, they also believed that planning is very, very important. So like I explained, there's also certain instances when they said that sometimes they do not get inside information, but when they don't get inside information, they have to fish for it themselves. Then they have to do thorough planning. And so the term that they use for getting inside information, just to go back, the term they use for a person who's inside, who gives them information, they call the person a fingerman or a charo. So a fingerman, basically their job is to point them in the right direction. So as I explained before, it could be a person who works for the bank or a person who works for the cash and transit company. And then in a case where they don't have a charo or they don't have a fingerman, then the concept that they use is called is finder. So finder basically is a term used by armed robbers referring to finding information themselves without being approached by a fingerman. And so, like I said, incidents where there's no inside information were perceived to take longer. So that's why they prefer to go get inside information so the robbery can be a bit quicker, as opposed to when they use the finder principle, then it takes a bit too long for them to execute the crime. So it was indicated that in their quest to fish for information, they sit in places like shebeens where they eavesdrop on conversations. So the one guy explained this concept. He said, sometimes you have police officers or you have people who are working for the bank or for the cash and transit company. I mean, on weekends, we go to places where we are drinking, we go to parties, and if they know that you work for a cash and transit company, then they can follow your moves. And then if you are at this party or at this shebeen and you start being happy because you were drinking and stuff, and then you start talking, or you're casually talking with other people without realizing that you are actually divulging confidential information. So in the case where then they are not directly asking you for information, then they eavesdrop and gather that information from you without you realizing that you are giving out information. And then another group of highly respected members of society implicated to have links with armed robbers are members of the SAPS. So at the time when I was doing my research, I remember it was a time when the captain from the intelligence, I think it's Captain KGB, he was actually implicated in a lot of cash and transit robberies. And then, so my respondents, about 23 of them out of the 40, indicated how successful they have been in their careers as armed robbers due to connections they have with law enforcement officers or officials. So they said, we make sure that we also bribe the police. The police will usually tell you that as long as you are not going to commit murder, then it's fine. So they take the cash and go, and they divert armed response on the day of the robbery. Then I also got an opportunity to interview a police officer who was convicted for cash and transit robbery. So this for a police officer at the time, he was at Hoshimampuru. And then so this is what he said to me. He said, as a police detective, my job was to escort the gang, to protect the loot and the guns. If the guys get arrested, I got rid of the evidence. If there is chase, the guys must see to finish. It would be easier for them if they are arrested with no evidence on them. I was always on the off-ramp using the police vehicles, but sometimes I didn't have an official car, then I arrange a car that resembles a police vehicle. Just to explain what an off-ramp is, in a cash and transit robbery, you have a couple of vehicles that are used, as the brigadier explained. But so you've got vehicles that will be used on the scene, one of the vehicle will be used to ram the AV, so that vehicle will be left on the scene in most cases because it would be damaged. But you also have other vehicles. You have your getaway vehicles on the scene. So then what the offenders will do will get into those vehicles, and then they'll get to a place which is like a couple of kilometers away from the actual scene, like your on-ramp, your actual on-ramp, or a road that is very easy to actually get away. So then the car that stops there is called an off-ramp. So it's part of the getaway vehicles, but it doesn't stop at the crime scene. It stops a couple of kilometers away so that it's not noticed on the scene. So then in this case, this police officer was responsible for driving the off-ramp using a police vehicle. So then also what was explained was that in certain, like in most cases, the robbers wouldn't hop into the car, the police vehicle. But if they do, and there is roadblock, then what usually happens as a police officer, his car will actually be let go without being searched. And then this guy would actually get away with the robbers. And then he says that it's in certain most instances, he wouldn't have the robbers with him, but he has the loot and he had the, as explained here, he also has the weapons. So then when the robbers are stopped, they don't have any evidence on them. So the robbers might have, they hop into another off-ramp. So they, I don't get into details about the modus operandi, but the other cars that are used as an off-ramp, for example, like a Kumbi, you know, a big car where all of them can get into. And if they are stopped at an off-ramp, it looks like it's just people in a taxi, so they're not being searched. Or if they are being searched, then they're not going to be finding any guns or money on them, so there is no evidence. And then the police officer has actually gotten away with the evidence, and he meets the robbers at the safe house where the loot is going to be shared. So that's basically this guy's responsibility where the cash and transit robbery is concerned. And then this guy said, in the case I got arrested for, there were, okay, no, there's another guy. He says, in the case I got arrested for, there were 3 policemen working with us. We use police vehicles as off-ramps, like I said, and this way, we and the cash are safe. Even if there's a roadblock, they could not stop the police. So I don't know if that's the case, but that's something you need to look into. And then another guy says, I was arrested about 2 times for heist, but I bribed police officials both times and my docket was lost. I was acquitted the second time because of the lack of evidence. Police officers are there for backup and to listen if there's any response and divert it. We often used police vehicles as off-ramps. You can see off-ramp is coming over and over and over again. We used police vehicles as an off-ramp. In this way, we would be safe as a police vehicle would not be stopped in a roadblock. Police officers are on our payroll. We control them. They never refuse our money. We borrow them cars, buy them airtime, and book them holidays. So that's just a few snippets. If you go into my dissertation, it goes into a lot more detail of what these guys were saying. And so as you can see from the preceding disclosures, they suggest that the level of criminal involvement by banking and CIT company employees is very high and needs urgent attention. What is more worrying, however, is the role of police officers in the facilitation of such crimes. I know I keep on emphasizing police officers, but they did make mention of other law enforcers who actually do get involved in cash and transit robberies or facilitate the crime. They spoke about the magistrates. You know, they spoke about the kind of lawyers that they use as well. Because one of my questions that I asked was that, as I said, in criminal career, we want to know why a person continues committing crime. And the guy said, as the brigadier once again said, that it's because they're used to a fleshy lifestyle. So they need to maintain that fleshy lifestyle. But the other thing, actually, is that they say they spend a lot of money on lawyers. So because they've spent so much money on lawyers, they have to actually go back and make that money again. So lawyers were also implicated a lot in my study. So I have a couple of recommendations here. I just took what might be relevant to this presentation, but there's a lot more in my dissertation. So firstly, banks and CIT companies should not only rely on surveillance and target hardening to deter criminals. It is also necessary that staff members are trained and retrained on policy and procedural matters. With regard to routine matters, banks and CIT companies should not become complacent by using the same crew, the same routes, and collecting or dropping off cash on the same days and same time. It is highly recommended that employees rotate their duties and shifts to eradicate predictability. I don't know, Kevin, when I spoke about this the last time, it looks like the industry had already started rotating their employees where the routes are concerned. So I hope this is happening, because this is actually one of the ways in which the robbers are able to make relationships, especially with the cash and transit employees and the bank employees. So to discourage staff members from networking with criminals, rigorous employee vetting should be conducted on a regular basis. And I think this is something that is actually neglected a lot by both the police and both the security companies. Vetting, vetting, and vetting. Because a person might come into the police force or might come into a security company being an honest member of the society. But as they actually continue their career, they can be corrupted. So please don't neglect the issue of vetting. And I'm also glad that the Brigadier mentioned and emphasized the issue of vetting. And earlier on this year, in June, when the Minister spoke about the measures that they are introducing to deal with cash and transit robberies or robbery aggravating circumstances, I was also approached and asked what I think of what he had announced, and I gave my opinion. And the first thing that I emphasized, which is not included here in my presentation, is the issue of intelligence, which was also spoken about by the previous speaker. Crime intelligence, both on the operational and strategic level. But the other point that I wanted to emphasize is for a dedicated aggravated robberies or cash and transit unit with a dedicated reporting line. So I don't know if this has been done as yet, but I think it's something that the Minister was working on. And the reason why I recommended this as well is that this will actually enhance investigation, crime investigation, where the emphasis has to be on command and control. And a properly designated individual, department or unit, and resources for investigation of CIT, maybe not CIT only, but, aggravated robberies, will actually be facilitated if there is a designated unit. And then this is where prevention of incidents such as losses of dockets, for example, will take place, or investigation of police officers, assistant robbers, also needs to be looked into. And then I'm going to go back again and say this is why rigorous periodic police vetting or spot checks should be conducted on a regular basis, especially of the group that are targeted, which are easy targeted and collaborated with. Those are your highway patrollers that needs to be vetted also on a regular basis. And then if one knows that she or may be periodically checked, there is a high possibility, I believe, that they may be deterred from collaborating with robbers. And Brigadier, you stole my closing slide. There it goes. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you very much for that illuminating presentation, Dr. Tubani. Much appreciated. And I would love now to call on Mr. Kevin Twynham to do his presentation. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Burger, and to the ISS, thank you very much for inviting us to share this presentation, or more specifically with the two previous speakers. We're really honored. Thank you very much. Before I give you an idea of what my presentation is about, I think you would have noticed that 2 days ago at News 24, a whole complete environment with regard CIT environment, a whole presentation was put together on what where we currently stand in terms of the numbers per year and obviously cash losses. And I think one of the particular ones which the media were made inquiries about was the 1 billion rand lost between 2008 and 2016. And some of the questions, is this indeed so? I think perhaps just some clarity on that, that you understand that it's only cash loss. It's got nothing to do with loss in terms of damage caused, collateral damage, loss of life, and a whole host of things. That is solely cash loss in that particular period, taken from the cash in transit environment. So probably my portion of the presentation is not probably as interesting as the two previous speakers, but I think what's important is perhaps to place into context what we refer to when we look at statistics and how we deal with these statistics, because I think there may be some confusion about the numbers in the cash in transit environment. So perhaps moving on, just to give you an idea of 2016, 2017, when you look at that, and please forgive me, the portions in red obviously are related to the way analysts speak. When they talk of a 1 to 2 increase, it's 100%. Unfortunately, from an operational point of view, we always argue about that. But when you look at those subcategories, in terms of cash in transit crime, those subcategories relate to the risk exposure of the CID companies, particularly in terms of crime. So you have those number of categories, and you'll see some of them very few, but I think that I'd like to point you or alert you to the fact that that there are two of those subcategories that really concern us, and it's obviously the cross-pavement environment and the vehicle on road attacks. Perhaps just an explanation. I think the others are quite self-explanatory. This is where the risk exposure is at the time of a CIT company. The very first one, ATM site, is where they are doing a replenishment and are either attacked at the particular ATM site or while conducting replenishment inside the ATM room. They are attacked, and those are the areas where most of these incidents would take place in the categories I'm referring to. The bank premises, very simple. It's a servicing point, so they would service a particular bank branch and be either robbed while in the bank branch or en route between bank and vehicle. The third one, in terms of merchant premises, slightly different, very similar to a bank. That is where they are conducting a service at a retailer, and in the cash office before or while collecting that cash are either there accosted and robbed or while between cash office and vehicle. The cross-pavement one is slightly different in how we do that. It would be actually where the actual security guard is carrying the cash container between service point and vehicle and is attacked. And it's in these areas where we find also a lot of violence, where they are shot point blank, don't even know that they were shot because they shot from behind, and obviously the cash container taken. The next one being the pay point. Those are the pension pay points or grant pay points where robberies occur, and it happens obviously also in terms of where the cash is conveyed across pavement. So from those are some of the references we. So they'll be categorized in that format. The own premises is the one that Brigadier Cadwell had referred to, is the very recent one in the Witbank area of the robbery in 2014, where the criminals would actually attack the cash center, the base of a CIT company. Then the static AV attack, that's usually not the cross-pavement one, vehicle parked in the parking area of, for example, a shopping center, and the vehicle is attacked while static, waiting for the guard to bring across the one. Then the cash in transit vehicle on road, none other than while the vehicle is in transit, is attacked by a whole number of criminals. So in 2016, I haven't gone back before that, but in 2016 you had 51 versus 102 in 2017. But I think what's important, because those are the two areas I probably will touch on, and more so in the vehicle on road attacks. Bear in mind that vehicle on road attacks have occurred way before 2014 and 15. As far back as 1997, we had rammings, we had spike chains pulled across the road to obviously bring it to a standstill, and you would appreciate that these vehicles probably weigh in excess of 20 tons. So to use those vehicles to ride on rims won't get anywhere. It has to come to a standstill. And the evolvement of this type of crime is to where we are today, is the use of explosives in the way they also bring it to a standstill. So vehicle on road attacks, it already way back in, as I said, in 1997 occurred. The very first use of explosives already occurred in 2008, and that was in the Flagstaff area on the 11th of March 2008. The next one obviously occurred between Bloemfontein and Kimberley, near a place called Pietersburg, also a use of explosives. And from there, we've seen a slight increase over the years from 2008, and actually really noticed in 2015 the huge increase that we've been seeing happening, specifically as we moved into 2016 and 17. So 2017 was an area that we were really concerned about, and all of this has been continuously brought to the attention of all stakeholders about what we've noticed over the period of increases, particularly vehicle on road attacks. Similar slide, more particularly relating to where we are today, and obviously these stats are as of the most recent, the 4th of September, and you will see that we stand on 78% in terms of the vehicle on road attacks. Most of the other categories, with the exception obviously of cross pavement robberies, are quite low compared to those two particular subcategories. Now, when we look at the particular areas with regard to 2008 to 2018, more particularly in terms of incidents and losses, you will see quite a decline and then a sudden incline in this particular area, where I was referred to in 2015, where we already started seeing this very sharp increase in terms of a number of incidents. What you're seeing there is what the Brigadier had referred to. Those particular cash losses there relate to two own premises attacks, the one where that 104 million was stolen, and that's why they see that sudden spike in that area, and that relates to the own premises attack. And this year will relate to the CIT overall crime type, and it's not subcategorized. And obviously this area that you're looking at here was you suddenly seeing, and most of it predominantly with regard to vehicle on road attacks. Just a further breakdown in terms of the violent crime on CIT subtypes, and I've not used all of them. I've more particularly used those as they indicated, and I think what you would like to perhaps have a look at is the cross pavement one, which is in the purple. This is one here, and obviously the vehicle on road attack. There we are, the yellow one. You'll see the sharp incline in all of those, and this decrease continually of all the other subtypes that we are talking about. Significantly, again to refer to the Brigadier's point, that little cross that you're seeing there is for the first time in 2018 we have seen vehicle on road attacks overtake cross pavement attacks. So in other words, your cross pavement carrier has reduced to such an extent that vehicle on road attacks are now the most prominent subtype that we are dealing with. Probably more clearer in this particular slide in terms of vehicle on road incidents, and again I refer to that portion over here. So you would have seen the sharp increase in this period. This decrease we're referring to here also refers to the recent interventions that the Hawks, the South African Police Service, and for that matter the CIT companies have embarked on in addressing the situation to where we are at the moment from a normalization point of view, a stabilization point of view, going into hopefully a normalization as we move into the festive season period. Again, I stress this point here, which is very important. I think it's in all the time since 2003, it's the first time we've seen cross pavement incidents lower than vehicle on road attacks. Now, when you look at vehicle on road attacks, bulk cash, total write-off on vehicle, you can really think, I think you've seen the very first slide in the opening, what that vehicle looks like after explosives have been used in these attacks. So just a breakdown in terms of the provinces, the most important areas, obviously, funny enough, Eastern Cape still one of the problems. And you also saw in the media recently the arrests that had taken place with regard to an incident that occurred in the Eastern Cape, where arrests were made in Sasolburg. Gauteng remains the highest, contributed to most of these. But the areas that are encircled are obviously the areas where our concern lies, in terms of vehicle on road attacks, more particularly than cross pavement attacks. Self-explanatory, I don't have to go into much detail. So the areas, Gauteng and the provinces surrounding Gauteng, are where the concern lies. And a lot of the focus in terms of the Gannelimp that the Brigadier was talking about was focused in those particular provinces. And we've suddenly now see a number of increased incidents, increase in incidents in the Eastern Cape area. Ironically, arrest where they were returning to Gauteng in this week, for that matter. This particular slide just relates to time of the day, and obviously these things happen every single day, at any time of the day. But I think what's important is that we look at the questions posed as to why we're seeing this. So from the early morning point of view, you would see that would relate to vehicle on road attacks. And late afternoon would also relate to vehicle on road attacks. And it's a simple argument. They would obviously leave base to conduct replenishments. That would be the run they were doing, carrying large amounts of cash. And in the afternoons, returning to base after doing a number of servicings, also loaded with cash. The portion in the center would be directed at cross-pavement attacks, at wherever that it would be. But it can be further obviously broken down in terms of the time of the day. So mostly cross-pavement attacks happen between 10 and 2 o'clock in the afternoons. Mondays is obviously a special day, which you also would see in that area. And I think the most logical argument about that would be is that there's a lot of servicings happening on a Monday as a result of weekend consumer spend. Just a breakdown of of those injured as a result of cash in transit crime. Self-explanatory again. I think there's about 118 in total year versus probably 108 in 2017 year to date. When you look at that, probably on par with what could happen in one mining disaster. But surely much concern about that particular figure in terms of deceased, regardless of whether they're perpetrators or not. The fact is that's loss of life as a result of this type of crime. Number of injuries, and then obviously that area there just indicates the amount of violence accompanied by these incidents and used by criminals. So folks, I thought it would probably, and it's just as well, I think it complements more or less what the Brigadier was referring to. These are the type of firearms that are used. And I think we're all acquainted with the AK, with the exception of this AK. All of these firearms are the same caliber. And most of these firearms are either used by security companies. That one originates from Israel. That is our R4, R5. And obviously the AKs is where the concern lies at the moment. But the fact of the matter is that the fact that these are the same caliber means it's very easy to obviously secure ammunition from wherever, whether it be within the police service, whether it be in the military, whether it be security. These are the firearms that they would use. That firearm is also more readily used by your CIT companies, and referred to as the dash prod. I think what's important in terms of that particular firearm that was recovered, if you look at the state of that firearm, the condition of it compared to this one, that seems to be fairly new. And much concern is expressed about that particular find in terms of where this is. They're both the same caliber, obviously same firearm, but the fact is that it's not necessarily a firearm that's been used quite often because of the condition that it's in. So it's been secured very recently. And we know that police stations have been robbed recently in the Eastern Cape, and obviously that information, that firearm could probably be stemmed from there. I'm just giving you some insight to the type of firearms. Much concern about the type of firearms that are being used. Obviously, there are handguns, in other words, by way of a pistol, revolvers that are also taken at the time of these robberies. It's quite apparent that the criminals involved here just flogged these to the normal criminal in the street to make use of those firearms as they deem fit, and this is what they're after. AKs, much concern, as I said, about the AKs. I think our concern is that it's not used by South African security forces, number one. Number two, the condition of these firearms does not reflect the condition of firearms probably used by military or security forces across our borders. So these are probably old firearms in the hands of criminals, and they must have been purchased brought across our borders. If you just look at the state of these firearms. In this one, the butt of this rifle has been removed, obviously to convey and to conceal much easier. When we're looking at the type of explosives, Dr. Berger referred to the explosives. Most of the explosives, or predominantly that is being used, is commercial explosives, similar to what's being used in our mines, similar to what's being used in construction, surface blasting, and obviously the packaging that it comes in is removed and repackaged in these formats that you're seeing. In this particular one, this was an electric detonation, and I think why I'm illustrating this is that it probably requires a little more skill to do an electric detonation as opposed to an igniter fuse. Because if you touch the poles of these on a battery at the wrong time, and your focus still inside that vehicle, they're probably going to be damaged similar to what this vehicle would be. So when you're looking at the footage, if you've seen the footage of most of these incidents, they would not ignite a fuse or detonate it electronically, and the distance that they would not be miles. It's just around the corner. So it's quite apparent that they are aware of what the dangers are, number one. Number two, and understand the control of the use of these explosives, particularly the blasters. The packaging can come in various formats, which is in the next slide also. Various packaging, detonators in cartons, and that's the way they would conceal it to get it transported. I just added this one because this was a dummy device that was used to intimidate CIT crew in a vehicle so that they could actually open up. But that's the way these things are transported and contained by our criminals. In terms of the vehicles, ironically, also self-explanatory, but these are the favorite vehicles. Criminals are probably also people of habit, similar to us all. Love to use Mercedes-Benz as getaway vehicles, and also double cab or single cab bakkies, LDVs. The reason being is that when seated at the back of that vehicle, anybody following can be attacked because they have the firepower on the back of that bakkie, while they use these particular vehicles to convey their cash and get away from a crime scene. But these are just merely a few of the vehicles to illustrate what type of vehicles. We've even had Porsches, Land Rover Discoveries being used and obviously flogged shortly after these robberies. Brigadier mentioned the military precision issue. I particularly put this slide in for one reason, is that there's sometimes misinterpretation, misconception about the use of this term, and that one is insinuating that actual military involvement or police involvement. But I inserted this slide here from the bit of analysis, and most of it is done by some of these forensic specialists at SABRIC in intensive study of the footage. Doesn't matter whether it's even if it's posted on social media. But if you look at the type of setup in these two instances, this obviously is the N4 attack earlier the year, and this one is the Boksburg attack. Now, if you look at what our researcher had mentioned about the roles each of these play, blasters, drivers, gunmen, very similar, to protect those people conducting their business in the inner cordon. What you're not seeing here is vehicles that are parked on the peripherals to do exactly what this individual has got to do. That gives you an idea how professional and how military, with military precision, they conduct this operation. The gentleman that you see over there, very soft fellow, he is the guy that would have collected the cash and would be placing that cash into that vehicle so that they could do their escape. This fellow here would hop across the road and get onto the back of the LDV that's stationed on that side of the highway. So I think what's important is organized crime has manifested itself very similar to what the Brigadier said. This is not unique to South Africa. This crime type may be, but the fact is, this is what organized crime is about. The use of the right skills to ensure that they're successful. And it probably ties up with the amount of cash that they steal and get away with and are able to pay off whoever they need to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. I think that was an extremely informative presentation in terms of the kinds of weapons, especially, and tactics and explosives that these criminals use. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we now say goodbye to our online viewers. Thank you very much for joining us. We will now have a question and answer session.